News of the Times. Bridget Durgan, the Maid, the Murder, and the Smile that Haunted 1867. Welcome to News of the Times. Today we travel to 1867, Raritan in New Jersey, a quiet town shattered by one of the most gruesome murders in its history. When a beloved local woman is discovered dead in her own home, stabbed, slashed, and burned, suspicion falls on the most unlikely of suspects, her live-in maid, Bridget Durgan. But as the investigation unfolds, so too does a twisted tale of jealousy, betrayal, secret letters, and a most unnerving smile. Bridget's trial captivated the nation, but was she a cold-blooded killer or a convenient scapegoat in a time and place that didn't welcome women with secrets? And in today's further particulars, we bring forth the story of the man in the iron mask. No, not that one. In 1908, an iron-masked gentleman pushing a pram across Britain claimed to be on a wager for roughly $100,000, roughly £3 million today. Walking the world, never removing his helmet, and surviving solely by selling postcards of himself to the curious. He even claimed to have married one of the 31 applicants who answered his classified ad, despite never revealing who he actually was. A bit of a tale, this one. Now, if you find yourself strangely compelled by iron-masked charlatans, suspicious wagers, or early 20th century pram logistics, you may quite possibly be one of us. Consider liking, subscribing, or sharing this episode with a friend, a cryptic stranger on a train, or that one cousin who swears they too are doing something for charity but won't elaborate. Each click holds a lace-trimmed glove in the face of the algorithm, which currently believes we're a millinery podcast hosted by ghosts. Now then, tie your apron, hide the kitchen knives, and do try to avoid smiling at the jury. Let us return to 1867, and a most unsettling case indeed. Background. Bridget Durgan was a young Irish immigrant working as a domestic servant in New Jersey in the 1860s. Like many Irish women of the time, she had come to the United States in search of opportunity and found work in the home of Dr. George Coryell and his wife Mary Ellen. Little is known of Bridget's early life, but by all accounts she was competent at her duties and, until the tragedy, had maintained a respectable position. That said, tensions between Bridget and her mistress appear to have escalated in the weeks leading up to the murder. Bridget had reportedly been given notice to leave, a common enough occurrence, but in this case, one that may have already had deadly consequences. When her employer was found brutally murdered with over 50 wounds and evidence of a frenzied attack, all eyes turned to Bridget. Her strange behaviour, conflicting story, and damning circumstantial evidence would ultimately cast her not as a grieving bystander, but as the prime suspect in one of the most horrifying domestic crimes of the 19th century. It was rare, almost unheard of, for an American crime to find its way into the prim and parochial pages of the 19th century British press. But every now and then a case came along so shocking, so ghastly, that even the Atlantic could not contain it. The savage murder of Mary Ellen Coryell and the trial of her Irish maid, Bridget Durgan, was just such a case. Blood, fire, bite marks, and a strangely composed smile at the gallows, all the elements one suspects that made even the editions of Glasgow Herald's clutch their pearls and reach for the printing block. And so, with transatlantic horror duly peaked, from here we leave all commentary behind and present the following text exactly as printed in the Glasgow Herald on June the 15th, 1867. Listen closely, for it carries the same phrasing, punctuation, and atmosphere that gripped the readers at the time. From the Glasgow Herald, the 15th of June, 1867, murder of a physician's wife in America. Extraordinary trial. A trial for murder has lately been concluded in America, which may well be termed extraordinary when all its attendant circumstances are taken into account. In the first place, the victim and the accused party were women living in the same house and standing towards each other in the relationship of mistress and maid. The murder for some time was shrouded in mystery and was one of the most cruel and diabolical deeds ever perpetrated in a civilized community. All these circumstances excited an unusual amount of interest on either side of the Atlantic, and when the trial commenced a few weeks ago, the American newspapers were filled day after day for nearly a fortnight with its harrowing details. We have therefore taken the trouble to draw out a narrative of the case from first to last as it came out in evidence at the trial, and which we now lay before our readers without further preface or apology. Previous to the 25th of February last, there resided in the little town of Newmarket in the state of New Jersey a physician named Coriel and his wife, who is said to have been an amiable and accomplished lady in the bloom of youth. They had one infant child and a servant girl named Bridget Durgan, who was of Irish extraction, as her name seems to indicate, and who had hitherto borne a good character so far as her master and mistress knew. The mistress and maid had some differences, however, and Bridget was about to leave her situation for some other place. On the afternoon of the day above named, Dr. Coriel left home on professional business, stating in the hearing of his wife and the servant girl Bridget Durgan that he would not be back till very late in the evening, and very likely not that evening at all. Mrs. Coriel, Bridget, and the baby were therefore left in the house, and the doctor went away all unconscious of the dreadful tragedy that was to be enacted in his absence. How the two women conducted themselves from 5 o'clock in the afternoon till nearly midnight will possibly never be known, but a little before that time, one or two of the neighbours heard, or thought they heard, certain outcries and sounds of a suspicious character proceeding from the doctor's house. As the outcries were not repeated and the other sounds ceased altogether, the neighbours did nothing and soon composed themselves to sleep. About half an hour past midnight, however, the servant girl Bridget aroused the inmates of another house, and having obtained admittance, she horrified her hearers by a tale of robbery and murder. She had the child in her arms, her hair was hanging in disorder, her clothes were torn and partially stained with blood, and she seemed to be in a terrible state of excitement. She informed Mr. Little, the proprietor of the house, that at about 10:30 a couple of burglars had knocked at the kitchen door of the doctor's house, and her mistress, thinking it was the doctor returning, she ordered her to open the door when the assassins rushed in, mounted the stairs, murdered her mistress, ransacked the whole premises, and finally set fire to the house and made their escape. On hearing this tale of horror, Mr. Little dressed himself as quickly as possible, armed himself with the loaded carbine, and was about to hurry off when Bridget informed him that the carbine was useless, as the murderers had left, and singularly to say, had left without taking anything in the shape of plunder along with them. Mr. Little hurried out, however, alarmed some of his neighbours. On reaching Dr. Corniel's residence, they found the doors open and the place partly on fire. In a few minutes the fire was extinguished, and on searching the house they found Mrs. Corriel lying dead in one of the bedrooms in a pool of blood, with at least 50 stabs and gashes all over her head, face and neck. There had evidently been a terrible death struggle, for the furniture of the room, the bed clothes and the body clothes of the poor woman were disarranged and torn, and even the bed tick was torn open and the feathers scattered upon the floor. Spots and stains of blood were found upon the bedposts, the chairs, the carpet, the door, and the sides of the lobby, as if the murderess at work bled, being commenced outside the bedroom and completed within. On removing the body outside the house until the fire was fairly extinguished, they found Bridget Durgan in the darkness, stripped of that portion of her dress with the stains of blood upon it. This circumstance did not excite any suspicion, but it was remembered afterwards and formed an important link in the chain of circumstantial evidence which soon encircled her from head to foot. Early in the morning the officers took possession of Dr. Corriel's house, and a thorough examination of the premises was made. It was then discovered that the last struggle had commenced in the sitting room, and that the poor victim had been dragged along the lobby and entered the bedroom, where she was finally dispatched. It was also found that a small cabinet upstairs and a locked desk, in both of which the Dr. Corriel and his wife kept their money and valuables, had been overturned and opened. Well, no other article of furniture had been disturbed. A butcher's knife belonging to the house was missing, and after a patient search it was found stained with blood and buried in a water closet situated in the backyard. The body of Mrs. Corriel was subjected to a post-mortem examination, found to be mutilated in a manner above described, with the lower limbs dreadfully bruised by some blunt instrument, and with deep marks of human teeth. These circumstances pointed strongly to a woman as the assassin of Mrs. Corriel, and worse circumstances of a similar character were subsequently brought to light. The authorities felt convinced that no man would inflict 50 gashes upon a defenceless woman, when one could be made sufficient for his purpose, and certainly no man would ever think of biting his victim while she was in the agonies of death. And moreover, Mrs. Corriel could not have maintained a long or severe struggle with two men, if it was really true that two men were the murderers, as Bridget affirmed. And then it was absurd to suppose that strangers with robbery and murder in view would come to the house of their victim without weapons, and even if they did, they could not have any interest or aim to conceal the knife afterwards, seeing that it belonged to the house and not to them. Taking all these circumstances into consideration, the authorities, supported by the medical men, came to the conclusion that Mrs. Corriel was murdered by a woman, and that Bridget Durgan was either the principal or an accomplice in the scene. Bridget was therefore subjected to a rigorous examination and cross-examination, and for a time she tenaciously stuck to her original story of the two burglars. She described the personal appearance and dress of the men most intimately. She told how they got into the house and how they found the knife, but she could not give a proper account of the time they were alleged to be there, or how she did not make her escape with the child at once and raise the alarm at the nearest house. She affirmed that the murderers came at about 10:30, and it was proved that she did not reach Mr. Little's until 12:30. Was it reasonable to suppose that she voluntarily remained in the house for 2 whole hours with a couple of murderers, or that she remained quiet with the corpse for some time after they left? She did not allege that she was held in the house or locked in the house while the bloody work was in progress, and when she saw the difficulty about the time, she prevaricated a little and changed the hour of the burglar's entrance from 10:30 to 11. But even this time left an hour and a half unaccounted for, and that looked exceedingly suspicious. Her appearance at Mr. Little's door on the night, or rather morning of the murders, was also very suspicious. Her hair and clothes were in disorder and stained with blood, as we have already stated, and yet she denied being upstairs near the body and said nothing of the murderers struggling with her or injuring her. She had not been upstairs, and yet she was able to inform Mr. Little that the midnight assassins carried away nothing with them, even in their pockets. How did Bridget come to know this? How did she come to get her clothes stained with blood if she was innocent of murder and had never been near the body? How did she pass the nearest house when she went out to give the alarm and go to another house nearly 120 yards further away? How could the murderers escape without being heard or observed by somebody? And how did they think up setting fire to the house when the first sight of the flames would be sure to alarm the entire neighbourhood? And then there was a new fall of snow during the course of that eventful night, but no footprints save those of Bridget Durgan could be found leading in any direction from the house of Dr. Correal. Bridget's replies to these and other questions only served to deepen the suspicion against her, and in due course she was committed to prison and charged with the murder of her mistress. While awaiting her trial, Bridget Durgan omitted 2 or 3 line declarations. She attempted to incriminate at least 3 innocent people who were fortunately able to prove an alibi. Bridget admitted a certain share of complicity, but she denied having any hand in the actual murder. Bridget confessed that she opened the door to the burglars knowing their business beforehand, and that she told one of them where the most valuable part of the plunder would be found. Bridget had the opportunity, and the victim was mangled in a similar way to Jesse the Cleaver crime. Bridget attempted to get rid of the blood-stained clothes and to account for the stains, but the clothes were found and formed important links in the chain of evidence against her. In this case, there was no scapegoat on whom she could throw the blame by the concoction of a statement, and outsiders whom she tried to implicate were able to prove an alibi. She alone had the opportunity, so far as can be ascertained, and the motive was most probably either plunder or revenge, or both. There had been some quarrel between a mistress and her. Bridget received notice to quit, and although no property was actually taken away or concealed, the secret receptacles of the house were found to be overhauled, and no stranger could have done this, and nothing more by accident. It was also proved that the child had been stripped after the murder and dressed in other clothes with bloody hands. Bridget affirmed that the child's cradle was in the kitchen on the night of the murder, and yet it was found in the sitting room upstairs, spotted with blood. During the greater part of that night, she was busy washing her own clothes, the child's clothes, in different parts of the house. and twice before daylight she had dressed and undressed herself. She was told to stay at Mr. Little's house with the child, but she could not keep away from the scene of the bloody tragedy and was always putting things to rights. She was observed visiting the outhouse where the knife was afterwards found, and to crown it all, a cast of her teeth were taken which fitted exactly with the teeth marks on the neck of the murdered woman. All these circumstances left no doubt in the mind of the judge or jury that Bridget Durgan was a murderess. She was consequently found guilty after a trial of unusual length, but her sentence has been delayed. While the jury were returning their verdict by the lips of their foreman, Bridget stood up and stared them in the face without faltering. She then turned to her counsel and said, "Can I speak?" And when told that she could not until she was brought up for sentence, she left the courthouse for the prison cell with a smile upon her countenance. The counsel for the prosecution showed by strong circumstantial evidence that Mrs. Correal had been attacked, in the first instance, while partially undressed and asleep upon her bed. It is probable that the murderess waited for this opportunity, and when all was still in the bedroom, she took up the butcher's knife, stole along the lobby hall from the sitting room where she was nursing the child, and, fiend-like, stabbed and hacked her helpless mistress in the dark, leaving her for dead. It is said that the poor woman must have recovered consciousness after this, and hearing her child cry, she staggered out of the bedroom and confronted the murderess in the sitting room area. Here it was where the death struggle must have taken place, as the bleeding victim was being dragged along the lobby to her doom. It must have been at this particular time and place where Durkin was upset in the struggle, when she got the shoulder of her dress stained with blood and sank her teeth into the neck of her mistress. The floor, the walls, and the doorposts from room to room were scratched and stained with blood and desperate fingers in that awful moment, and during that terrible passage from the one room to the other. It must also have been at this time that the neighbours were aroused by the outcries, which sounded like, keep away from me, and spare me for my child." Outcries that were made in vain, and could not be repeated before the anxious mother was brained by the chair of her own child. While describing this part of the death scene, the learned counsel said, let not men talk of the courage of the battlefield, which led men with flying banners to follow some beloved leader through scenes of wholesale carnage. What heroism could compare with that of this young Anne gentlewoman, who, bleeding with half a dozen wounds, tottered in the stillness of the night to confront her murderous one for the sake of her poor baby? Such are the principal features of the Correal murder case, as we find them brought to light, and all of their hideous deformity before a court of justice in the state of New Jersey. It was a crime of particular atrocity, and Bridget Durgan will henceforth take her place in the chamber of horrors with the Palmers, the Pritchards, the Mannings, and the McLaughlins of modern times. Following her conviction for the murder of Mary Ellen Correal, Bridget Durgan was sentenced to death. She was hanged on March the 20th, 1868 in New Jersey, becoming the last woman executed by the state. Her hanging drew a large crowd, a morbid spectacle typical of the period, and contemporary reports noted that she maintained her composure until the end, consistent with that unnerving smile mentioned in the Glasgow Herald article. To this day, the case is remembered not only for its brutality, but for the eerie mix of domestic normalcy and the unthinkable violence, and the unsettling image of a killer who quite literally smiled at the gallows. Further particulars. Before we wrap, let us momentarily exchange our blood-stained corsets and courtroom transcripts for something altogether lighter and infinitely more bewildering. Imagine, if you will, a man in an iron helmet pushing a pram through the English countryside, claiming to be on a wager for a small fortune. Add postcards, eligible bachelorettes, music hall detours, and a caravan large enough for his mysterious wife, and you've barely scratched the polished surface of the story that follows. This isn't satire, this was news. So, polish your monocle and suspend disbelief, for we now present the tale of the Iron Masked Wanderer as faithfully and fantastically reported in 1908. From the Essex Newsman, the 13th of June 1908, the Iron Mask, if you only knew who he was. The man who is walking around the world pushing a perambulator and wearing an iron mask reached Chelmsford on the 16th inst. Interviewed by a representative of the Essex County Chronicle, his story was this. In a London club not 100 miles from Pall Mall, an American millionaire wagered that I would not walk around the world pushing a perambulator and wearing an iron mask for $100,000, equaling in English money about £20,000, value approximately £3 million in 2025. I accepted the challenge and started according to the conditions, one of which, by the way, was that I could take as long as I liked over the walk from Trafalgar Square at 10:30 a.m. on January the 1st, 1908. I went via Woolwich, Chatham, Dover, Folkestone, etc., all along the south of the country, through the West Country, and down the Midlands to the eastern counties. I am now going up the east coast to Scotland, and thence to Ireland, and then across to Canada. My only means of subsistence is the proceeds of selling postcard photographs of myself and the perambulator. I am not allowed to accept anything save curios without paying for it, either in money or postcards. If a person offers me a glass of water, I must pay for it. I usually give postcards in payment. If I don't fulfil the conditions, I shall lose around about £5,000, value today of approximately £770,000. I am accompanied by a friend who sells the cards. The helmet weighs 4 pounds 5 ounces, and the perambulator 1 stone 3 pounds, approximately £20. In the pamphlet which the Iron Mask sells, describing what he has undertaken to do, it is mentioned that he was on the lookout for a wife and would open correspondence with any who would marry him. He received 31 answers from ladies, including 3 from titled ladies. He made his choice and is now married happily. He has a caravan with a very fine appointments, in which he sleeps at night, where his wife lives. The mysterious traveller testified to the kindness he had received from the police on his journey. He said it was his practice to get at each town the signature of the mayor or other responsible person to certify that he had passed through that town. He showed our representative an exceedingly interesting book of autographs. He goes to the stage at music halls along the route, but receives no reward except that of selling his postcards in the auditorium. It was due to the fact that he had to lift his perambulator off from and onto stages so often that one of the springs broke, so he decided to have a new perambulator built for him, and this was done in Portsmouth. To make it run more easily, he had pneumatic tyres put on the wheels. Of course, he is not limited to the number of prams that he may use, so long he is always wheeling one of not less than 15 pounds in weight. He may have as many as he likes. He started wheeling the new perambulator at Romsey in Hampshire on February the 27th, when at Teignmouth he attracted such crowds that 4 policemen had to escort him to the post office to post his letters. The first time he had tea with a stranger was at Hastings. He had to have his meal behind a screen, it being fatal to him to be recognised. The Iron Mask bewailed the fact that he could not go to church, having always course to wear his helmet in public, but he said on his journey he had been to 2 meetings of the Salvation Army and one at a Baptist chapel at Launceston. The authorities in each case allowed him to enter their place of worship with his hat on. He anticipates trouble in China, but hopes to get through the other countries without accident. He further informed our representative that he is not doing the walk for financial benefit, since he has an income of £1,600, which he is not allowed to touch during the walk, value approximately £246,000 today, and that he intends to give the $100,000 to charity. He says he's in excellent health and has put on several pounds in weight since he started from London. He will have to pass a night at his home, and his great anxiety is that he may be recognised there. In taking leave of our representative, he said, "I am a great traveller and have only been home for 3 months during the last 8 years. I have no doubt that I am well known by you and by repute. If you only knew who I was, people would be very surprised if they did know." As you may have guessed, or fervently hoped, the tale of the perambulating philanthropist in the Iron Mask, Harry Bensley, turned out to be an elaborate hoax. No millionaire wager, no world tour, no tragic inability to attend the church in full helmet, just one deeply committed con man with a flair for theatre and an eye for gullibility. His real aim to turn curiosity into coin, postcards by postcard, town by town. The marriage, the caravan, the mysterious identity, all part of the mystique, part of the marketing, a sort of Edwardian GoFundMe meets vaudeville. Eventually, authorities pried off the metaphorical mask, but not before thousands had been charmed, baffled, or lightly swindled. And while the Iron Mask may have come off, the sheer audacity of the stunt remains immortal, filed neatly under British eccentrics advanced level. And thus concludes today's programme. 1 part savage murder, 1 part pram-based performance art, and all entirely factual, which is frankly the most unnerving bit of it all. If you enjoyed this descent into mystery, mayhem, and Edwardian nonsense, do consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. Each action gives the YouTube algorithm a gentle poke in the ribs, or if you prefer, a firm smack with a rolled up broadsheet. Should you wish to spite the algorithm altogether, simply send this episode to a friend, sworn enemy, or your aunt who still suspects her neighbour is hiding something stolen silverware in the rhododendrons. Until next time, keep your prams oiled, your knives sheathed, and your masks firmly strapped on. Good day. If today's parade of prams, poison, and the perils of domestic service has left you delightfully unnerved, we have just the cure, more of the same, daily, without a single intrusive advert to spoil the mood. Our Patreon is where we keep the good silver. Over 600 episodes, tucked away like letters in a governess's forbidden drawer. It's where crimes are chronicled, nonsense is nurtured, and corsets are optional but encouraged. And if you are the sort who enjoys your scandal with a splash of silliness, make haste to our blog at Robin & Co. It's updated almost daily with news, musings, and the occasional fugitive semicolon. No algorithms, no pop-ups, just you, us, and the comforting sound of Victorian boots fleeing the scene. Links below. Tap them or don't. We're not your valet. This has been News of the Times, and I'm Robin Coles, archive custodian of forgotten umbrellas, responsible for cataloguing abandoned brollies by colour, temperament, and tragic backstory.